Hello, today we're going to be looking at transposing. So transposing is a fundamental skill of algebra. So let's start with something that we all should know. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Alright, why is this statement true? Well, you can argue that 1 equals 2 minus 1. All I've done is I've subtracted 1 on both sides, and now I only have 1 left, and then now I have 2 minus 1 on this side, and 1 equals 1. Well, let's say I didn't know this fact, and I had x plus 1 equals 2, and I just simply couldn't work it out. So what I'm essentially asking for is, what is x? This value here, what is it? What can I do to solve? Well, I can subtract 1 on both sides, and I get x equals 2 minus 1, which is 1. And you can sub that back in, and you get 1 plus 1 equals 2. And that's what we explained previously. It starts getting a little bit more complicated when you go for do other operations instead of just addition and subtraction. So really, we're looking for the inverse operations. So the inverse operation of plus is going to be minus. The inverse operation of minus is going to be plus. Right? What about times, multiplication? That's going to be division. What about the inverse of division? It's going to be multiplication. And every time I put something in orange here, I'm showing that I'm using the inverse to cancel something out. So with that in mind, let's do another example. So I have x plus 2 equals 3. Again, you could probably work this out without using algebra, but let's do it anyway. So I'm going to use the inverse operation of plus 2. It's going to be minus 2. And minus 2 on both sides. These 2's cancel, and I'm left with x equals 3 minus 2, which is 1. And that stands true. Alright, what about something like 2x? So 2x plus 1 equals 5. So, what order do I go about this? Well, you would think BODMAS, or BIDMAS, or PEDMAS, depending on where you're from, depends on what you've been taught. But we're going to go in almost reverse. Brackets, indices, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction, right? BIDMAS. So I have addition, and that's lower in the list, but I'm going to deal with it first. So I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides, and now I'm left with 2x equals 4. And now I have to divide both sides by 2. And I get x equals 2. So you see how I went in reverse. Instead of starting with brackets and then going to indices, division, multiplication, instead of dividing to get multiplication out of the way, I've subtracted to get rid of the addition out of the way since it's lower down. Now you could try the exact same example but do it in reverse. So let's do that over here. 2x plus 1 equals 5. So let's divide by 2 now, right? So now I have to divide everything by 2. And I'm ending up with fractions, which isn't very nice, but it still can work. So what I now have is x plus 1/2 equals 5 over 2. And now I need to subtract 1/2 And what I'll get there is x equals 4 over 2, which equals 2. So we got the same answer, but you can see that it's a whole lot nicer if we just don't deal with fractions. Alright, let's try another example. 3 lots of x plus 1 equals 6. What I can do here is I see the 3 in front, and I just want to get rid of it right off the bat. So I'm going to divide by 3. So I now have x plus 1 equals 2. I can subtract 1 on both sides. And get x equals 1. There's another way that I could have done this, and that is by expanding first. So I could have just done 3x plus 3 and expanded this bracket equals 6, and then I can subtract 3. That gives me 3 equals 3x, and then I can divide both sides by 3. And I'm left with x equals 1. Again, same answer, two different approaches. How you go about doing it is really up to you, but do you really want to expand when it's already given factorized? It seems logical to just do this instead. Here, this would have required an extra step to get to the final result. Again, personal preference. What happens if we get a little bit more complicated? X plus 1 is going to equal 2x plus 3. Again, I'm going to use inverse operations, but now I've got x on both sides. So I'm going to have to somehow manipulate the equation so that x is only on one side. Now I want to do it in such a way that I don't get negative numbers for my x. Now, again, this is personal preference, but for this particular example, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract x now on both sides. Now I have 1 equals 2x minus x is just x plus 3. Now we have something a little bit more familiar. I can subtract 3 on both sides. I get minus 2 is x. If I did it the other way, if I subtracted 2x instead, so if I subtracted 2x on both sides, I'm now going to have a negative x plus 1 equals 3. Now I'm going to have to subtract 1 both sides. So I get negative x equals 2. Now I'm going to have to get rid of the negative. So the way that you can do that is you can either divide by negative 1 or times by negative 1. They have the exact same effect. I'm going to times by negative 1. We get x equals negative 2. Again, the same result, but you see this negative here? That's an extra step. I have 4 lines here when I did it in 3 over here. So it's these little tricks that speeds up your computation of these things. Alright, let's get even harder. Alright, so here, I could try and divide by 5, but that means I end up with a fraction over here. I don't necessarily want that. If I divide by 2, I'm going to get a fraction over here. So what I would do is I would expand both of these this time. 5x, 5 times 3 is 15, equals 2x minus 4. This seems a whole lot easier to deal with, no fractions involved. So I can now subtract 2x and we'll get 3x plus 15 equals negative 4. I can now subtract 15 onto the other side. And 3x now equals negative 19. And I'm now going to have to divide by 3. And x now equals negative 19 over 3. Then you can just leave it like that, or you can put it into a mixed fraction if you like. But you can leave it just as is, right there. Alright, let's try an even harder example. So x squared equals x plus 2. So what kind of x value does that make sense with? Well, we can find out with transposing. So let's subtract x plus 2. Notice how I put a bracket in here to represent that I'm subtracting everything onto the other side. So subtract x plus. What will end up happening is x squared, and I'm going to expand as I go, so x minus 2 equals 0. And now I can solve this quadratically by factorizing. This will be x minus 2 of x plus 1. If you don't know what I'm doing here, there's a video on quadratic factorization. With that, I can now use null factor law, which basically says get the opposite of whatever's in the bracket here. So the opposite of negative 2 is 2. The opposite of positive 1 is negative 1. X has 2 solutions rather than 1. So that's all the time that I have for transposing. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below or contact me on social media, and I will see you in the next video.